right, we're ready to get started with our program. Got a couple more little notes we want to cover first. Jennifer has put together a list of, or chapter contact list. I'm going to pass some of these around, and if you're not on here and would like to be, we want to name, address, phone number, email address, and also something we want to start doing. I want to, if you don't mind, you don't have to put date of year of birth, but we'd like to have everybody's birthday, if at all possible, just so we can get up and sing happy birthday, because we all don't want to miss that opportunity to be able to sing happy birthday. Henry likes singing happy birthday. I heard him do it a few times. Also, we have a schedule Jennifer put together for us. Greg, Jennifer put this together. This is our air show schedule for this year. These are some of the events that we're going to try to get to. I'm going to pass some of these around and maybe make note of or take one home with you if you'd like. This is basically April, May, and then September and October of this year. We have quite a few aviation-related events, air shows that are coming up that we'd like to be involved in if you guys want to participate. I'm going to circulate these here in a few minutes, but Ron Alexander, like I said earlier, is our speaker today. And Ron, if you'll come on up, we'll go ahead and get started with the program. Ron is, as I said earlier, he is a member of the Georgia Aviation Hall of Fame. Every airplane builder, anybody who's built an airplane in the state of Georgia or the Southeast in the last 20 years or longer knows Ron and has dealt with his company. He had a company called Alexander Aeroplane who sold out to Aircraft Spruce, who is a company that all aircraft builders know about. Ron was a far-seeing guy who saw the benefit of that years ago, and everyone knows that whenever you're building an airplane, John Preacher over here, who's built and big A&P guy, works on a lot of airplanes. How much money have you spent with Alexander Airplane over the years, John? Not enough, right? Absolutely. Well, all right. Well, welcome, Ron Alexander.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Travis. It's a real opportunity to be here today. It's actually an honor to be here. And I just want to say that how grateful I am to Travis, Brent, John, all the people whose names a lot of you I don't know, but who are involved in doing this. I think it's a absolutely great thing that you're doing. My father served in World War II, and his brother served in World War II. His brother was in the Normandy invasion, lost his life there, received the Army Cross for bravery at Normandy. So I have some heritage back to World War II. Every year, as several of you know, and I kind of wandered around here a little bit, every year, as some of you know, we have a Veterans Day event at Candler Field. Excuse me, and during that event, every year we try to honor the World War II. We honor all vets, but we try to specifically honor the World War II vets because, as we all know, we're declining. And last year, I believe, year before last, we had about 25 World War II veterans who showed up for our Veterans Day event. And this last year, if I remember right, it was somewhere around 12, 15. So I want to give you a personal invitation to come down this year. I believe it's November the 7th. It's the first Saturday in November when we do our Veterans Day event. And we would just really enjoy having you come down and visit with us, and we'll make sure you're well taken care of. I was in the Air Force for 5 years, flew in Vietnam, flew Caribous in Vietnam, and as Brent knows, that was an Army airplane, and the Air Force stole it away from the Army, and I was actually in the Air Force and was involved in that transition. And so I did my training at Fort Benning in the Caribou with the Army. I was assigned to if my memory serves me correct, it was the 96th Aviation Company, I think it was, in Queen Yan in Vietnam for about a month and a half, and then I was transferred in. The Air Force took the airplane over in January of 1967, and so we were moved to Da Nang up in the northern part of South Vietnam. And I'll share just a couple of quick stories with you later on during the presentation. And you know that old adage, the older I am, the better I was, you know. And I think we can all identify with that somewhat. But first thing I'd like to do is share a little bit of the Atlanta airport history with you. And I've got some really good pictures to show you of that. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the history, but it has a very interesting history actually. And that history dates all the way back to 1909. And I have some great slides. You'll have to forgive me here because the cable I have wasn't quite long enough, so I'm going to wander back and forth just a little bit. This gentleman is Asa Candler, and Asa Candler was the founder of the Coca-Cola Company. He actually bought a recipe from a druggist for the Coke product, and he later on developed it and of course became well known as the founder of the Coca-Cola Company. Mr. Candler was also a race car buff. And so again, we're talking about early 1900s, and racing of automobiles was not too popular at that time, so Mr. Candler still decided that he wanted to build a racetrack in the Atlanta area. So for those of you who know where the Delta Airlines headquarters is located today on Virginia Avenue, that's where he built the racetrack. And the racetrack again was built in 1909, and not much happened with it. It was quite an elaborate racetrack, and I'm going to show you a couple pictures of it here in just a few minutes. But not much happened with it, so in 1910, the Atlanta Journal decided that they would host what they called an air exhibition at the time, which today we would call an air show. So remember now, we're talking 1910. We're talking 7 years after the Wright brothers first flew. So when you saw an airplane in 1910, it would sort of be like us seeing a space shuttle go by or something of that sort today. So it was quite an event. So they had a few airplanes that showed up. They landed in the midfield of the racetrack itself. And from that day, which was December 15th, 1910, the day the first airplane ever landed in the Atlanta airport, from that day on, it obviously has transitioned to something that is now the largest and the busiest airport in the world. So let me share just a little bit more of the history with you regarding the airport. I think most of this I have mentioned. Let's look at a couple pictures. This is a picture of the racetrack itself prior to anyone actually landing on it. And this is the area, this flat area here is the area that they started landing on. This is Virginia Avenue right here. And this photograph was taken about 1909. And then I have another photo here of one of the airplanes that initially landed there with Lincoln Beechey. Lincoln Beechey was a pretty famous aviator back in the 1900s. This is probably a Curtiss Busher, I would think, something of that sort, the airplane that you see there. And this was taken again at the air exhibition in 1910. We're very privileged to have a lot of really good photos that were given to us by a number of people through the years. The next photo is a picture of the actual speedway itself. And as you can see, it was very elaborate. You can see that they had safety in mind back in those days because this is all a dirt wall here so that the cars could not get into the crowd in any way. So several of the race cars that you see and so forth, and then the next picture I have is a very interesting picture. This was shared with us by Asa Candler's great-grandson. The gentleman standing in the middle is Asa Candler. The gentleman to his left, or excuse me, to his right, to our left, is Louis Chevrolet, founder of the Chevrolet Motor Company. And this is a very, very rare photo of the two of them together. And of course, Louis Chevrolet later, Chevrolet Motor Company later slowly evolved with some other people into General Motors, which is obviously still alive today. So let's go back and look just a little bit at some of the things that occurred back in those days. 1918 saw the beginning of scheduled airmail service. And quite honestly, the interesting thing about the history of the Atlanta airport is the fact that everything that is currently taking place in Atlanta today could have just as easily been taking place in Birmingham, and almost was, because Birmingham actually started a little bit ahead of the Atlanta area as far as airports were concerned. So the leaders of Atlanta knew that if they were going to put Atlanta on the map as a hub, they were going to have to get an airport, which they did not have in 1918 for this scheduled service that was beginning. A fellow by the name of James Elliott started leasing the airport property from the raceway property from Mr. Candler, and started operating with a Jenny and so forth. And we actually, and I'll show you a few pictures, we actually have a Jenny, a flying Jenny, down at our museum. But not much happened with it because people were afraid of flying back then. There wasn't much going on as far as people actually clamoring to come out and ride an airplane. So his business sort of went away in about 1923. And then another gentleman picked up where he left off, and his name is Doug Davis. And Doug Davis actually is from the Griffin area, and he, along with William Hartsfield, and I'm sure you've heard of his name, they were instrumental in bringing about the beginning of the Atlanta airport. And this all really started occurring back in about 1925 or so, when Doug Davis, who I have a picture of here, actually built the first hangar on Candler Field itself. So Doug Davis was one of the pioneer aviators, one of the people really heavily involved in beginning the Atlanta airport. And he had a contract with the Curtis Candy Company, and I'm sure several of you have heard of the Curtis Candy Company. If not, you've certainly heard of Baby Ruth candy bars. So what they would do, they would actually take Baby Ruth candy bars and they would tie little parachutes on them. And he would fly over, these are Waco 9s here, and they would fly over crowds and schools and so forth, and they would drop these candy bars out with little parachutes. That's the way they advertised. Now, can you imagine us doing that today? How long would it take before we'd be in jail if we did that? Yeah, one time if we were lucky, huh? So an interesting story about this, was picked up in the Pittsburgh paper, because Doug Davis flew the Wacos all throughout the East Coast and doing this for the Curtis Candy Company. So he was flying over the city of Pittsburgh one day, and they were dropping out all these little candy bars and so forth down in the downtown area. And according to the newspaper account, it created what they termed a massive traffic jam. Now, I don't know what a massive traffic jam would be back in 1925, but certainly we know what one is today, don't we? That's for sure. I've encountered it about every time I come to Atlanta, I think. But anyhow, it created a massive traffic jam. And so the city council held an emergency session, and they enacted an ordinance prohibiting any airplane from ever flying over the city of Pittsburgh again. So you can imagine how long that lasted. So Doug Davis was famous not only for his stuff that he did with the Atlanta airport, but for other things also. This is this fellow in the airplane is Beeler Blevins, and Beeler Blevins built the second hangar on the Candler Field Airport, yet to be named Candler Field. The airplane that he has there, I think, is a standard J1, if I'm not mistaken. And you can see the interesting thing that you'll notice about people back in the 20s is the fact that two things that are very apparent. Number one, they didn't smile very much. They didn't have a whole lot to smile about, did they? And number two, they always wore coats and ties, no matter where they went. And even if they were working on an airplane, they would probably have a coat and tie on underneath coveralls or something that they'd be working on. It's just kind of an interesting aside. So let's go back and let's talk about what really happened with the Atlanta airport. So I mentioned to you in 1925, things started beginning with the airport itself. That's when the hangars were first built there and so forth. But it was not yet called Candler Field. However, On April 16th of 1925, as you see, Atlanta signed a document creating its first airport. And they thought, well, you know what? Asa Candler owns this. So they got together and they said, let's name this field, let's name it Candler Field, because if we name it Candler Field, Asa Candler will more than likely donate the property to us, right? Well, it didn't work that way. Asa Candler was a smart businessman. So instead, he later sold the property to the city of Atlanta for the sum of about $94,000, which it's a lot of money today. It was a whole lot of money back in the 1920s, that's for sure.
Is that the airport that you mentioned on Virginia Avenue?
Yes, ma'am. It later became the Atlanta Airport. That's correct. That's correct. I think it's interesting here, this statement that you see right here. This is a major understatement that, of course, during their period of time, they had no idea. But this gentleman said, we are ready to make Atlanta the southern aviation metropolis. This purchase, meaning the purchase of the property and the airport, will mean much more to Atlanta in the future than we can realize at this time. What did he? They didn't have a clue what was going to happen, did they, through the years to bring Atlanta Airport where it is today. A few significant dates that occurred. First commercial flight was flown in 1926 by a little airline called Florida Airways. Florida Airways had about 4 or 5 airplanes that were based out of Miami, and unfortunately a hurricane came into the Miami area when all of their airplanes were located there at that particular time and destroyed every one of them. So they were no more. So they were gone. And so later on, Pitcairn Air Aviation, which later became Eastern Air Transport, started flying in 1928. And as you can see too, Charles Lindbergh, he actually passed through Atlanta several times, one time in particular in 1927, which we have several pictures of him coming into the Atlanta airport. So really the first airline to operate scheduled service out of Atlanta was Eastern Air Transport, being preceded with the name Pitcairn Aviation. So Eastern started flying in really at about 1928 and 1930, they started a regular passenger service, and in that interim time, Delta started working into this too, and they started working in about, as you see, June 12, 1930 was the first flight into Atlanta by Delta. One of the interesting things about Eastern Air Transport is they flew an airplane called the Curtiss Condor. I doubt many of you have even heard of that airplane. To my knowledge, there are none in existence today. I don't know of any that have been restored. But the Curtiss Condor was a twin-engine fabric-covered airplane that carried about 12 to 14 people. And Curtiss, and by the way, just as another aside, Glenn Curtiss did not get proper credit for all the things, and does not get proper credit for all the things that he did in aviation. The Wright brothers get all kinds of publicity and they get all kinds of credit. The Wright brothers, quite frankly, were a detriment to aviation after their first flight in many respects, because they were constantly suing other people like Glenn Curtiss who were creative, inventive, and innovative, and they created more problems than they did help after they did their first flight. Glenn Curtiss was an extremely active inventor, a brilliant man. He not only designed a lot of airplanes, airplane engines, motorcycles, race cars. He's the first person to invent a motorhome, basically. It started out as a pull-behind camper. But if you have ever had the opportunity, or if you ever do have the opportunity, to visit the Glenn Curtiss Museum, it's in Hammondsport, New York, which is in the Finger Lakes area. Believe me, it is probably the best museum you'll ever visit for a private museum. It is outstanding, and I would encourage you to go there and visit. I'm going to show you a picture of a Curtiss Condor. There were only a couple of airlines that operated the Curtiss Condor. Eastern was the primary one. American had a few of them. had Liberty engines on them, water-cooled engines. And I believe this picture, if I'm not mistaken, was taken in Charleston, South Carolina, if I'm not mistaken. But as you can see, not the prettiest airplane in the world by any means.
Is that a fuel tank on top of the nacelle?
You know, I'm not sure what that is, Brent. We don't know what that is. I think that is a fuel tank, but I'm not real sure. But it was quite an airplane, and Eastern had a whole bunch of them that they operated. This is your typical happy family back in the 1920s. You know, as you can see, they're thrilled about either going for a ride or they have just gone for a ride. The term barnstormer actually comes from the fact that the pilots, the early pilots back in the 1920s, this is a Curtiss Jenny, by the way, with the Jennies and so forth, flew around, and what they would do, they would hop from town to town. They'd fly over the town, maybe do a loop or so. Sometimes they'd have someone with them who would parachute out over the city, and then they would try to find a field somewhere to land in where they could operate for a few days and hop some rides. And they would hope that the field they landed in was owned by a very nice, understanding farmer. And sometimes that was the case, and sometimes the farmer would meet him with a shotgun. But nonetheless, this farmer seems like that he's pleased because he'll get some money out of this. And so a lot of times the pilots would end up sleeping in barns and so forth, and so the name Barnstormer evolved from all of this. And they did some amazing stunts too, as you'll see. This is unbelievable, some of the things that they did back in those days, and this was a common occurrence. And obviously you can see this guy's trying to drop out into the race car here. And this is a Curtiss Jenny again, and by the way, if any of you would like to attempt this, we've got the Jenny. We could probably rent up a car someplace and we could fix you right up. And here is a very interesting person. The little guy on the left, his name is Bonnie Rowe. Bonnie Rowe is from this area. Bonnie Rowe's son flew B-24s in World War II. And we had the privilege of meeting Bonnie Rowe Jr. and videotaping a conversation with him where he talked about his father, Bonnie Rowe Sr., that you're looking at here. And Bonnie Rowe Sr. was quite a character, and he did all the stunts that you see and so forth. He jumped out of airplanes regularly and met his demise in a parachute jump when he was about 33 years old, as you might imagine. But Bonnie Rowe Jr., someone asked Bonnie Rowe Jr., did your dad go to church? And he said, the closest my father ever got to a church was one day when he bailed out of an airplane and he couldn't quite steer the parachute and he ended up landing right on top of a church near the steeple. And he said, that's the closest my dad ever got to a church that he knew about. But quite a character he was. Here's another picture of a couple of the stunts. I mean, these things are amazing. What these people did back in those days, absolutely amazing. And they thought nothing of it. And you know, the Jenny that we have, we fly fairly regularly, and I honestly don't know how they did some of this stuff. I really don't, because the airplane does not fly well at all. I mean, it's like herding some sort of a truck around or something of that sort. I mean, it's just really, really heavy on the controls, and they had these people hanging all over. I've seen pictures where they've had people back here on the tail, you know, 2 or 3 people on the wings, just all over the place. So it's amazing what they did back in those days with the airplanes. All right, let's talk a little bit more here about some of the pictures of the Atlanta airport. This is a picture of the Pitcairn hangar. This was one of the first hangars built on the and by the way, I neglected to mention Candler Field. Candler Field itself, Candler Field, which is the Atlanta airport, was called Candler Field until 1946. So from 1926 to 1946, it was called Candler Field. And then, of course, in 1946, it was renamed, and now we have a pretty long name for it that I can't even remember all the names that are involved. But going back to that, it was located directly where Delta's headquarters is today. And I'm going to show you an overlay picture of that in just a minute. This particular hangar is one that we're in the process of raising funds for right now to build. We already have 2 hangars in place, and this will be the 3rd hangar that we're hoping to start later on this year. Be a replica of that. Okay, this is the Atlanta airport in about 1930, maybe 31, somewhere in that vicinity. Virginia Avenue, right here. Okay, the entryway into it, Delta Airlines headquarters today sits throughout this area, right here. Okay, so what you see there, you see the terminal building. This initially was the American Airways hangar. This is the Eastern Air Transport hangar. And these hangars, this is the Doug Davis hangar that was moved actually. This is a Pitcairn hangar here, and these are a couple of military hangars, and these are military barracks back here. So it has, and there was a little house right in here where a black gentleman lived who was the caretaker for the airport. Now, unfortunately, I don't think there's anything that marks any of this on the current airport. There may be a marker somewhere, but if there is, I haven't seen it. This airplane down here is probably a DC-2, best I can tell, and not a DC-3. Eastern operated a bunch of DC-2s throughout their service. Okay, another picture, which is even a little bit more interesting here. This is a picture of the Atlanta airport in about 1937. And here's Virginia Avenue. Here's the picture that you saw just a few minutes ago of that area. And here are the runways. Here's an east-west runway here, and then here's a northwest runway that they're starting here. Notice the raceway around here. See remnants of the raceway. So again, an evolution of a raceway into the Atlanta airport. Here is a picture of, there's an overlay. This was taken in about would have been the early 80s, because the midfield terminal was in position. So here's Virginia Avenue, again, just for reference. And this is the raceway, where the raceway was located. Okay, a few other photos that I have here. This is the terminal building, and with a Delta DC-3. And then this is where the Delta Museum is located today. And this was was the Delta Airlines maintenance facility, later became Southern Airways maintenance facility. And then now today it's the museum for Delta Airlines. And if you haven't been down there, by the way, it's worth a visit. And you can now go to the museum without having to clear security or anything like that. They have an entryway so that you can drive right in. I had the privilege of flying Delta's DC-3 for about 5 years. And this was the 75th anniversary of the beginning of Delta Airlines. And we flew one of the original trips from Dallas back to Atlanta, making all the stops along the way, Shreveport, Jackson, Birmingham, and all the stops. And this is a Travel Air 6000, and this airplane is also in Delta's museum. We had the privilege of flying that some too. And that was Delta's first passenger airplane, the Travel Air 6000. So this was, when we would fly in and out of the Atlanta airport, our call sign was Delta 3. And of course the tower loved us because we messed up all the traffic every time we came in. And what they would do, they would circle us off the end of the runway we would just do a little pattern off the end of the runway. And then when they had a break, they would shoot us in real fast and get us out of the way. And then one day, a friend of mine, there were 3 of us that flew captain on the airplane. Unfortunately, this wasn't my day to fly, but they landed, and for those of you who are familiar with the Atlanta airport, it had, at that particular time, had 4 runways, parallel runways. And so they landed on runway 9 right, or I think it was, and they blew a tire on landing, and they couldn't clear the runway. Well, that was not a happy day, because now we've got the tail of the DC-3 that's too close to the runway, and the airliners can't land. So guess what? I mean, it was like, you know, the Atlanta airport lost 1 runway, which is a big deal, because there's a lot of traffic there. So they were diverting airplanes all over the place. And I thought to myself, if I were the president of the airline, and I got my briefing the next day about what happened the day before, and how many millions of dollars that DC-3 cost me, I'm not so sure I'd let her fly very much more. But I can tell you some interesting stories about the DC-3, because we had a few really interesting things happen with it along the way. 2004 was the last time that it flew, and it's sitting in the museum now. It's a beautiful airplane, immaculately restored by Delta and by volunteers at Delta. All right, let's talk about this just a little bit. Let's talk about what we're doing at Candler Field. This is a picture of the Peach State Airport. Peach State Airport has been in existence near Williamson, Georgia, which is not far from Griffin, since 1967. And it was a grass runway then, it remains a grass runway, but now we have developed it into, this is the old side of the airport. This is the hangar building that is a replica of the American Airways hangar as it existed on Candler Field. And that's where our museum and restaurant and everything is. This is a picture's about 2 or 3 years old. You can see that this hangar right here was under construction then. We just completed it. And that's a replica of that Doug Davis hangar that you saw earlier, the picture of. And then we have private homes toward the lake there that you see. So the purpose of what we're doing is we are replicating the original Candler Field, the original Atlanta airport as it existed in the late 20s and 30s. And we are building 1 building at a time, the buildings that were there. And there were 7 buildings there at that particular time in the late 20s and early 30s. This is a picture of, actually this picture was taken during Vintage Day one year, that you can see. Interesting story about the American Airways logo. A friend of mine flies for American, and I thought, well, should we just put American Airways logo up on the hangar, and then if they say something, we'll say, well, we're very sorry, we didn't know that we couldn't use that. Or should we call them up and ask them? So decided to call them up and ask them. So this friend of mine put me in contact with a lady who was one of the vice presidents of communications and public relations, and so I called her up, talked to her. She was very gracious, and asked her if we could have permission to use their old, this is an old logo that they had. And so she said, well, we'll talk about it and get back with you. And so, make a long story short, a couple weeks later she called and she said, we would be more than pleased to have you put our logo on this hangar, and by the way, tell us how much it costs and we will send you a check for putting it up. So I thought that was great. I love Delta Airlines. I flew for them for 34 years, but can't quite imagine them doing that. Here's another picture of the hangar building that we currently have. Since this picture was taken, we now have a patio out here. We have a covered area where people can gather out here and so forth. So the building itself, the restaurant is in this area that you see right here. So I'm going to look forward to all of you coming down, and I can personally show you the restaurant and the airport and everything coming up here in just a few months. We have a really, really active group of people here. We have a lot of really good volunteers. We have a flying club, 4 airplanes in it right now, and our main emphasis currently for the last 2 years has been on educational programs. And we have what I consider to be one of the better educational programs for youth that are aviation related in the country. And I just want to talk to you just a couple minutes about it because, you know, several of you may or may not be interested or may not have knowledge of the Experimental Aircraft Association. A lot of you do. But the Experimental Aircraft Association has a great young program called the Young Eagles where people give young kids rides in airplanes. Well, we started looking at that through the years, and I've preached this to the EAA too. You know, it's a great program. You take a young person for a ride in an airplane, you get them all pumped up and enthused and they're ready to go out and fly, and they walk away and you never see them again. Why? Because if you're a young person today, go someplace and try to learn how to fly, see how far you get. It's tough. It's not easy to do. It takes a lot of money and a lot of hard work. Go to Peachtree DeKalb. You know, Pat Epps is a good friend of mine. I love Peachtree DeKalb and everything about it, but it's not really user-friendly to young people, nor are very many airports. I mean, even Gwinnett County, as an example, as John well knows, you know, with Chapter 690, they do a great job with these things, but, you know, go knock on a door down there during the week sometime and find out, you know, where you're going to learn how to fly and how are you going to do it. So the point of all that is the EAA needs, and EAA chapters need, a follow-on program to the Young Eagles. They need something where these young people, when they get enthused, they can go to them and they can learn how to fly for an economical or at an economical cost. And so we're putting that in place, and I feel like we've done a fairly good job with it, and it hasn't been without its problems. But we now have about 35 kids who come into us on a regular basis. They work on projects that we have. For every 10 hours that a young person works, we give them 1 hour of flying time in our club airplane so they can earn their flying time. And I'm a great believer, and I'm sure I'm in a crowd today who believes with me, that we give our young people far too much. And they need to be earning things. And so the very inception of this program, we discussed giving scholarships and just handing money to kids to learn how to fly. And we said, no, you know what, we're not going to do that. We're going to make them earn their flying time. And a lot of people said that'll never work because, you know, kids just aren't interested in doing that today. Well, I'm here to tell you they're wrong, because they aren't interested in doing that, because we got 35 of them down there, and we have people all the time coming to us about this program. And we're not the only ones in the country doing it. Chapter 690 just started doing this. I know personally of about 15 or 20 places around the country that are doing this. So just a little plug for this program, because those of us who are older, who have been blessed with a great career, and I never went to work a day in my life because I love and still love what I do. I never had to work for a minute, because I flew airplanes and somebody actually paid me to do that. I couldn't believe it, you know. So it's a great career, and it's something that we need to help young people with as much as we possibly can. So I got a couple quick pictures here of some of the youth programs. We're rebuilding right now a Kenner Bird, which is an old biplane, a Super Cub, a Veronica Champ, a Stearman, and seems like we have one other project or so. But real active, and believe me, we have a lot of really good adult volunteers. We have about 12 dedicated adults, most of whom were, at one point in time, they had a career in aviation, either as a pilot, a mechanic, air traffic controller, something of that sort. And they are the reason that this program is succeeding, most definitely. Let's look at a couple of real quick pictures here, and then I don't want to take up your whole afternoon here by any means. This is our DC-3 that we're proud of. I've owned this airplane since 1991. I have a love-hate relationship with it. You know, she has a very definite personality, and she requires you watching her very close and gentleman that I sat with at the table here knows all about it. He flew C-47s back in World War II. And some of the others of you here may have flown a DC-3 C-47. The interesting thing about this airplane is an original DC-3. This is not a C-47. For those of you who are familiar with the Douglas, 1935 is when the first DC-3 flew. And of course it was a successor of the DC-1 to DC-2. It was purchased by American Airways. It was a Douglas sleeper transport, meaning that it had berths in it. You could go from Los Angeles to New York in about 17, 18 hours, and you could lay up in these berths and sleep if you wanted. So they built Douglas built roughly 360 DC-3s prior to World War II. And then, of course, World War II came along, and they started ramping up, and they built over 10,000 C-47s. So this airplane is not a C-47. This airplane is a true DC-3 delivered to Braniff Airways in 1940 and spent its whole life as either an airliner or a corporate airplane. We've had a number of dignitaries and people who have visited with us at Cameron Field. This is Harrison Ford on the right, and Christopher Maloney on the left. And Harrison Ford, we were doing a movie. This airplane has been in a number of different movies. It was in the movie 42, which is a story about Jackie Robinson. If you have not seen that movie, I would suggest that you watch it. It's a great movie about Jackie Robinson's life, first black baseball player in the major leagues. But Harrison Ford was there during, he was in that movie. And so he came down to Peach State on 3 different occasions. Actually flew his own airplane. He has a Cessna 182 that he had someone fly out here for him. And he really a great guy, really a true aviation enthusiast. Then we have, this is a picture of our Curtiss Jenny that we have. And this flies on a regular basis. When the winds are calm, we don't get it out otherwise. Remember back in the 1920s, you didn't have runways, you know, you had great big fields that you could land in, so it really didn't matter what the wind was. You know, you're always going to land, take off into the wind. Didn't have to worry about crosswind landing. Well, I can tell you with this thing, you worry about a crosswind landing. It has no brakes and a tail skid. So you're kind of along for the ride until you get your wing walkers with you to hold it straight down the runway. So it's a real honor and an experience to be able to fly something that's 100 years old, because this airplane is now 100 years old. We're going to, actually, I'm sorry, next year it'll be 100 years old. We're going to have a big birthday bash for it when it turns 100. Some of you ladies may recognize this gentleman. This is Tom Cruise, not a very good picture of him, but this is a Stearman Cloudboy that I own. We've taken to the museum quite a bit. This is a very rare airplane. It's the only one left flying. It's a predecessor of the Boeing Stearmans. They were making a movie. He's making a movie called Mina, which is a movie about a drug runner back in the 1980s. And so they were they were filming at Peach State the early days of the gentleman who was the drug runner and his flying and how he got started in flying. So that's why he was down. He was down for a couple of hours. Again, very much a gentleman, very aviation-oriented, enthusiastic. He was not in the scene that was being filmed there, but he came down simply because it was an old airport and he likes old airplanes. So, and he was a great guy to visit with. This is a picture of the airplane, and you'll see that in the movie, which is called Mena, M-E-N-A. Like Mena, Arkansas. This was a real honor here. This is Clint Eastwood, and we just did this one October of last year. And he is the director of a movie called Sully, which is about Sullenberger putting the airliner into the Hudson River out of New York. He is not in the movie, but he again is the director of the movie. And I'm going to tell you, this man is everything you might imagine him to be. He is very much a gentleman, very much a consummate professional, and he talks and acts in person, just like he does on the screen. It's pretty amazing, really. I mean, he just commands your respect. He's 85 years old. He's still out there every day. He was on the set for about 10 hours that day. And just a real pleasure to talk to, just a very down-to-earth person, and it was just a real honor to be able to work with him. And so the steerman will be also in that movie, which is called Sully. This is a Waco that we have, that we hop rides in, and I'm just going to move through some of these. There's some of the cars that we have, trucks and so forth. And then we have our restaurant, which I think you would enjoy. And we can hold large banquets and so forth there. And I think you do, you know, as those of you who haven't been there, I think you would really enjoy coming down. And I want to just give you, Travis, how much, do I have, 5 minutes or so? Okay. Because I don't want to get started on war stories. Because, I tell you why I don't want to get started on war stories. You know, I flew in combat as a number of you did. And we know what that's like. There's a bond, there's a brotherhood with people who have flown in combat. And there is a brotherhood of people who were in Vietnam, most definitely. Because Vietnam is not a popular war. And so, you know, when World War II veterans came back, you were applauded. You were recognized as you should have been and as you continue to be. When we came back from the Vietnam War, people would spit on us. They hated us. They didn't want us. And it was a tough time for a lot of guys. And so when someone comes up to me and they say that they were served in Vietnam, I have an instant bond with those people. Just like I'm sure a lot of you do who were in World War II. When you come up to someone who flew as a gunner on a B-17 or who was a navigator or something like that, you have an instant bond with those people because you have shared an experience that a lot of people have not shared. And a lot of our friends and a lot of our relatives are not here today who served in all wars within this country. And I'm a very patriotic person, and I get a little too wound up sometimes about political issues. But boy, I'll tell you what, I'm going to do my part to do everything I can to keep this country as free and as great as it is today. Now, one last quick thing. I know there was a picture that was passed around, and I was going to talk about that picture just very briefly. The picture you saw was a picture of a caribou that had been shot in half, and part of it, you know, 2 parts were coming down. That airplane was flown by Captain Alan Hendrickson, who was in my squadron, and Captain Hendrickson had my crew on board that airplane because we each had a crew when we were in Vietnam. And I was a young first lieutenant and had just checked out as aircraft commander and had my own crew. I was supposed to fly that trip that day. Excuse me, I was supposed to fly that trip that day, and Alan came to me, and he was the squadron ops officer. We all took turns being the ops officer on a couple days at a time. And he was supposed to be ops officer that day, and he came to me and he said, "Ron, will you be ops officer for me today? Because I'll fly your trip because and there was some reason that he had for that." So he took that trip. And what happened was, he was going into a special forces camp, which is what we supplied with the caribou. And as he turned, we made real tight patterns and came in as high as we could to avoid ground fire. And there was a howitzer, an artillery piece at 155 that was sitting on the field, and they were firing outbound. And normally the artillery people are very aware of this. And they have, my understanding, Brent, is that they have someone who clears the barrel of that piece before it's fired to make sure that there's nothing up there that they're going to hit close by. So they had cleared the piece. There was a general there, a brigadier general, 1-star, who was there with a Japanese reporter. And this reporter took a picture at the exact instant that 155 fired around and went through the tail of that caribou. The Caribou was turning base to final in a turn just like this, and the piece fired, and when it did, it just went right through it. And he had on board 155 ammunition, so you can imagine what happened when they hit the ground. They were only about, that picture was taken, they were 100 feet, 200 feet in the air at the most, and it went into a little pile that would have been no bigger than from here to the wall over there, just straight down in. So it was kind of an interesting story. I had the duty of going back and going through his personal belongings to send him back to his wife, which we always did. And in that, I found a poem that he had written that was a premonition of his death that day. And it was about the caribou. And I had someone write that out in calligraphy, and I have that posted in the museum down there. When you come down, you would find it most interesting to read this, because it most definitely is a premonition of Captain Hendrickson's death. But so anyhow, I could ramble on here for a long time, but I just want to say it's been a real privilege to be here with you today. It's an honor to be with World War II people. As I mentioned in the very beginning, I have a direct link with that. My uncle is buried in Normandy, and still to this day, and the amazing thing about that is, the French people there are so in tune with this. They are in some ways more appreciative of the veterans of World War II than we in this country. And there is a family there who takes care of my uncle's grave. And they do this regularly. I mean, they put flowers on it, they do all these things, and then not only to my uncle, but to most of the servicemen who are buried there. It's remarkable, and it's just an unbelievable thing. So, again, my thanks to you. I've enjoyed being here with you today, and I hope to see you all in Vintage Day in June. Thank you, Travis.
Does anyone have any questions? Anyone have any
Questions?
Any questions about the presentation? Woody?
Not a question, but I was just telling Roger's son here today that General Paul Tippett's first paying job as a child was throwing those.
Yes, it was. That is a great story. General Tippett, he later did become a general, is that right? I think he did. General Tippett was one of the first people that threw the little Baby Ruth candy bars out of Doug Davis's airplane. Absolutely, that's very true. Sure was. Any other questions?
Anything, anyone else?
Well, somewhere way back in the past, I landed here. It was in the early days, and I think it was a grass runway I landed on.
It absolutely was a grass runway. Absolutely, it was the first. I don't think the first pavement went down until about 1935 or so. Maybe even a little later than that. Okay, any other questions? Okay, I'm going to hold all you folks to come down to Vintage Day on June the 4th, okay? Gonna be there?
We are absolutely going to be there, Ron.
Okay.
We've already got the ball rolling.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks again, Ron. Yes, we're definitely doing that, Ron. It's going to be June the 4th, and we will discuss further as it gets closer to time, but we're going to plan on, if you want to write it in your calendars, we're going to plan on having that as our monthly meeting for June in Williamson. It's what, 60 miles from here, Ron, something like that?
Yeah, it's about an hour drive.
About an hour, a little over an hour drive from here. So, also, of course, since we were already back from Savannah, I've had several folks asking when we're going back to Savannah. First in line was Henry, of course. Like I said, he has a backpack now, sitting by his door at his house. We're going to shoot for the late April. It looks like we've maybe the 23rd or 24th, something like whatever that weekend. It doesn't look like there's anything going on that weekend as of now. So we're going to shoot for that, see if we can get it planned, and that's it for today. Thanks for coming, and hope you had a good time. And again, Ron, thanks for being here, and thank you all for. And yes, I'm sorry. Good Lord, it's raffle time. Sorry about that. Gosh, I almost got pelted out here. Yeah, come on up, Ron.